This reminds me of in the meeting room.
G'day everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is John Scaglione. I'm your building surveyor. I've just been asked to come in and do a brief or comprehensive presentation on the small lot housing code. As I understand, it's quite sought after in the business at the moment, and it's something we're going to see a whole lot more coming in, with developers cutting up super lots into more and more tiny blocks, and the fact that the smaller housing code is currently, which I'll touch on in the presentation, is currently being revised to include micro lots as well, which is anything between 75 square metres and 150 square metres. So it's something that's going to be more prevalent in the business. And yeah, so better to cover it now and get a comprehensive knowledge of it. And hopefully it makes it easier for everybody. So just a brief purpose on the code and a brief understanding of the code. The code was implemented to establish a building envelope for class 1s and 10s in urban growth zones under 300 square metres. So it was basically essentially, they brought it in to give the town planners a bit of a break. You all know they work too hard, so they brought it in just to give them a bit of a break. The code is not mandatory, as you guys can go through the planning permit process if you decide to have a house design that doesn't comply with the code. So there's always the planning permit process to fall back on. As I stated earlier, there's two types of houses in the code, type A, type B, which we're quite familiar with at the moment. And as I stated previously, type C, which is coming soon. They believe it's going to be implemented between sometime in September to early next year. So it's something that will need to be across, and you guys as well will need to be across, because I guess it's something that's going to come in quite quick. So, and as I stated, it's between lots 75 square metres and 150. So yeah, we're waiting with bated breath. I do believe they've asked for comments on the code. They have released a draft, which I do believe you guys have provided comments on as well. We've provided comments on it as well, and yeah, I guess that'll be coming in quite soon. Moving on to exceptions. Now, whilst the code is being able to be utilised for lots in an urban growth zone under 300 square metres, it is important to note that if you are an edge lot, if there is a lot adjacent to yours that isn't subject to the small lot housing code, Part 5 gets implemented back. So subject, let's say for argument's sake, your lot on the right hand side isn't on your plan of subdivision, or it's not subject to the small lot housing code. These regulations here on the left hand side must be implemented in accordance with Part 5. So it does tend to make things a bit more difficult, because then you've got to start taking into account things like length of wall and boundary, heights, north facing, and we know with small lot housing code how tough that can be. As you can see here, just on the right hand side here, it does apply to standards 90 through 96 of Part 5 as well, but they relate to things like fences, fence heights, and things like that, which aren't too worrisome, I would say, for you guys, as that's all governed by the developers anyway. So issues like that more arise in built-up areas, where if we've got fence heights for overlooking and things like that, it can create a bit of a problem. Standard 1, maximum street setback. So for the front wall of all new dwellings must not be set back from the street alignment greater than 1.5 metres than what's required as the minimum. So for argument's sake, if we're a type A lot and we're just a standard 3 metre setback, your maximum setback is 4.5 metres. Same for type B. Let's say for argument's sake, your 1.5 metre minimum, your maximum setback then will be maximum 3 metres. And we can take that to the porch setback as well. So that's fine. So don't worry, it's not to the front wall. Minimum setback is to the front wall. But let's say for argument's sake, you've got a porch that encroaches quite a bit, we can take our maximum setback to that porch setback. So that's okay, that's fine. Standard 2, minimum street setback. To determine the minimum street setback, you must first establish on your title what type you are, type A, type B. Establish if you're facing a declared road. If you're facing a declared road, as you could see previously, you've automatically got a 4 metre setback for type A's and type B's. So to determine your minimum, you need to know if you're facing a declared road or not. There is a VicRoads website. I'm not too sure if you guys are aware. That does tell you if you're on a declared road or not. We use that quite a bit. That's something I can provide in the pack that I'll send through to Andrew later on, and I'll give you all the links, and we'll put together a frequently asked questions as well. So we'll just put the information back together and we'll send that through. So I'll include that link for you. And also to establish if you're opposite a recreational reserve. So as you can see here, this diagram's in the practice note. As you can see, the lines with the green tips are considered to be opposite the recreational reserve. As you can see, the ones with the ticks are considered opposite. The ones with the crosses aren't considered to be opposite the recreational reserve. So if you have a look at the corner lot there with the tick, so I'll just point it out for you. So this lot here, as you can see, that will be its rated street frontage there. So that's technically opposite the recreational reserve. And as you can see there, the clarification, if that's your rated street address, you're not opposite the recreational reserve. So it goes off your rated street address. So that's just one to look out for. As you can see also on the bottom right-hand side, where we've got one of the lots that are half opposite and half opposite the street, they determine that as opposite the reserve, which we do too. So if you're half opposite the reserve, we'll give it to you, we'll allow you to be opposite the reserve. So that'll give you the 1.5 metre setback straight out. So it gives you a little bit more leniency to give the clients a better design, I guess, or a much more comfortable design. Keeping on standard 2, minimum street setback. So type A allotments. So it's 4 metres for a declared road, 1.5 metres if the allotment's opposite a recreational reserve, which we just touched on, and 3 metres in any other case. In all cases, at least 25% of the area of the front facade must be set back an additional 300 mil, which I'll touch on in the next slide. Minimum setbacks for type B allotments. So 4 metres for a declared road. So that's standard throughout type A, type B. If you're opposite a declared road, that's 4 metre setback. Or for type B, in any other case, it's 1.5 metres. So you can see in the diagram in the bottom right there, that's just an example of the articulation they do require on the front facade. So it's just at least 25% of the front facade must be set back an additional 300 millimetres. So that can be anything. That can be your garage. That can be any part of the facade. Needs to be set back an additional 300 mil. So I have seen some designs where you can get a bit creative with the articulation to the facade. So things like fins or protrusions in the front facade that we consider the front wall. Anything further set back than that, if that's 25%, we'll consider that front facade articulation. So type A allotments minimum side street setback is 1.5 metres. So if the wall facing a side street is more than 10 metres in length, then for every 10 metres, you must have an additional 10% area set back an additional 300 mil. So there's a lot to take in there. I've got an example on the next slide. I've just included the diagram on the bottom right, just to show you how we look at and how we calculate the side street, front street setback. So it's a bit different to your normal res codes, wherein we'll take the 1.5 metre setback and then we'll carry that through. So let's say that's your 3 metre setback there, that's your 1.5 metre setback. And the way we work out your corner splay is just the intersecting lines. So we don't have to take into account half the splay anymore for smaller housing code. We just do the intersecting lines, and then that'll be your building envelope there. Type B allotments. So minimum side street is 1 metre, and that's standard throughout Type B allotments, which is great. So obviously the tighter blocks will give you a bit more of a concession for side street setbacks. And this is an example, as I touched on earlier, of the side street articulation. As you can see, the 10 metre max length of wall requires a 1 metre minimum articulation width and a 300 mil setback as well. So it's got to have both, otherwise you won't comply. And if you're a double story, as you can see, it's got to articulate both floors. You can't articulate just one. So that's got to go through both for a minimum 1 metre and a max and a minimum 300 mil as well, length and width for every 10 metre length. So as you can see, 10 metre max length, they've articulated a metre minimum and 300 mil minimum, but you've got an extra little bit over to the left-hand side as well, because that doesn't achieve a minimum 10 metre length. That additional portion isn't required to be articulated. So it's only for every 10 metre length you've got. Now, minimum street setbacks as well for garage openings. So for a garage opening or a carport opening, must be set back a minimum 5 metres from the front street, or as you can see there, 2 metres from a side street. Now, it's important to note that the setback is to the opening, not to the set out, not to the garage set out. So it gives you a little bit more play there. You're not restricted by the brick wall or anything like that. You can give us the setback to the actual opening itself. A lot of people, a lot of builders do have in their designs a setback, let's say, for 5 metres to their garage opening. And then what they do is they like to extend out here a parapet wall to achieve their minimum fins or their minimum front facade articulation, which I'll touch on in a moment. So allowable encroachments into the street setbacks. We do allow, or the standard allows, eaves, fascias and gutters. Decks, steps and landings we do allow, but they have to be a minimum or a maximum 800 in height. So they may encroach into the minimum setback by a maximum 1.5 metres, but can't project over the street alignment for obvious reasons. So yeah, eaves, fascias, gutters, I believe all the designs we see from you guys at the moment do comply. The steps, decks or landings, we don't really see too many of those at the moment, only I guess when landscaping dictates or the site contours dictate. Yeah, so maximum 1.5 metres for any allowable encroachments into the eaves, fascias and gutters. Additional articulation. So this is where your porches, your front fins or your balconies come into play. To further encourage facade articulation, the standard requires one or a combination of the following must be provided to the front of the building and may encroach into the required front setback. So a porch, veranda or pergola can encroach into the setback minimum 800, maximum 1.5. It has to be at least open at least 2 sides, has a width of not more than 80% of the frontage, so it can't dominate the facade, and it cannot project that projects at least 800 millimetres and not more than 1.5 forward of the front wall. So it's important to note with porches and verandas and pergolas, if you have an eave attached to the front facade, the standard does say that the porch encroachments is a maximum 1.5 inclusive of eave, fascia, gutters, but we do get around that in the sense that as at Group 4, we permit it, we allow it based on the fact that you can have the eave, fascia, gutter encroaching further into the front facade. So what we do is we'll allow the 1.5 metre max with the eave, fascia, gutter as an extra. And I think that's standard. I think there are a few designs that you guys have where it'll encroach about 1 metre, 1.2 with a 450 eave, fascia, gutter over the front as well. So it is something that we do allow. And yeah, we haven't been picked up on it. If the developers approve it, we're happy with it. So at the end of the day, if someone's going to have a problem with it, it's going to be the developer. So if the developers approve it, we're happy with it. First floor balconies. So they can project into the front facade. There are two different distinctions when we're talking about balconies into the front facade. So a balcony must project at least 300 mil and not more than 1 metre if it has a roof over the top. So it is important to note that if your balcony is partially roofed, we consider that a fully roofed balcony. So if your balcony is roofed, minimum 300 mil, maximum 1 metre. And if you have an unroofed balcony, minimum 800, maximum 1.5 into the front setback there. Fins and sun hoods. So this is one that we like to see quite a fair bit because to determine what is a fin is very subjective. So they don't give you too much sort of guidelines on what to determine a fin is. Only guidelines you are required to work off is the aggregate height must be a minimum 3.1 metres high and projects at least 300 mil, but not more than 1 metre forward. So it doesn't give you a width. So if you've got a fin or if you want to have a design that can be interpreted as a fin, as long as it projects a minimum 300 mil and no more than 1 metre forward of the front wall, we can look at it, we'll be happy with it. There's no width requirements, but obviously working within sort of not taking the piss really. If it can be determined as a fin, we'll let it go. We'll determine it as a fin, but you can't have something that's, let's say, like 3 metres wide and call it a fin. If you've got something there that's about 1 metre, things like that, that's more of a front feature, we'll allow it. But if you've got something that's trailing off sort of a corner and it can be determined as part of the front wall, we will knock it back. But as long as you've got your minimums there of 300 mil and not more than 1 metre forward, yeah, generally we'll let it go. Standard 3, building height. So the height of a building must not exceed 11 metres if you've got a slope of 2.5 degrees at any cross section in the allotment. Otherwise, 10 metre max height. Generally, the maximum heights will apply more so to double stories, medium density, things like that. It doesn't really bother you guys too much. Generally, you'll go off a 10 metre maximum height. But if you do have a slopey site and it's going to affect your overall height, at any 4 metre cross section, if you've got a slope of 2.5 degrees or more, you can increase your maximum height to 11 metres. Standard 4, site coverage. So for type A allotments, it's 90% site coverage. Type B allotments, it's 100% site coverage. So with type A allotments, the percentage can be calculated as an average. So this is more for your medium density lots, or if you're sort of doing a run of medium density of smaller housing code jobs, you can take your permeability as an average of all those lots. So you just need to reach an average only for type A of 90%, or if you're doing a standalone dwelling on a standalone lot, 90% type A maximum, type B 100%, so you can cover the whole lot. It is great in a sense, but obviously there are challenges there with your private open space. You will need to, which I'll touch on later on in the presentation, if you're covering 100%, you will need to provide your private open space in the form of a rooftop terrace or a balcony. Permeability, again, so type A 90%, type B 100%. So you can, again, because you can cover the whole lot, obviously they're allowing 100% impermeable surfaces to cover on a type B. And as I stated in the previous slide, if you're doing a run of dwellings, you can calculate your permeability as an average over those lots. Car parking spaces. So type A allotments, you are required to provide one car parking space if the building has 2 or less bedrooms, 2 spaces if the building has 3 or more bedrooms. For a type B allotment, only 1 space. That's all you need. It is important to note the definition of a bedroom in the Small Lot Housing Code. They determine a bedroom to be any habitable room with a floor area of 6 square metres or greater. That's enclosed on all sides and has a window. So studies, storage rooms, anything really. If it's got PowerPoints and things like that, if it can be in any way used as a habitable room, we've got to deem it a bedroom, and then that will affect your car parking spaces. So I've got a couple of notes there as well, which I'll touch on. I've got another slide next. If 1 car parking space is required, must achieve a minimum 6 metres by 3.5. If 2 spaces are required, one must be at least 6 by 3.5 and the other can be 4.9 by 2.6. If you've got 2 spaces that adjoin each other, so a double garage, the width of the space can be reduced to 5.5 in lieu of. So as you can see there, you've got the tandem spaces on the left-hand side by 6 by 3.5, with the second space 4.9 by 2.6, and then obviously a double garage at 6 metres by 5.5. If you've got engaged piers, things like that within your car parking space, it's important to note that it is a clear width, so you can't take into account your engaged piers, things like that. They cannot eat into that space. It's got to be a clear width space, so you can see there with the dotted lines, they've just clarified that for us. So that's a clear width of 5.5 by 6, or in the case of tandem where you've got your single garage encased in brick, that's going to have to be a clear width as well. Side and rear setbacks, standard 7. Standard 7 doesn't apply to walls on boundary. That comply with standard 8, which I'll touch on next slide. So standard 7 is the same ratio, setback ratio, as regulation 79, side and rear setbacks. So it's not too tricky to comply with that. So you might see that they've got that 3.6 max on the wall on boundary. That's obviously there. So if you've got a single story, you can't have anything encroaching outside that, obviously. Allowable encroachments into that setback profile, 500 mil for porches, verandas, chimneys, sunblinds, all that sort of ancillary piping and things like that. 600 mil for eaves, fascias and gutters, which I think is your standard at the moment, 450 eave with a 150 fascia gutter.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Walls on boundary. So this standard applies to open carports within 1 metre and buildings on side or rear boundaries. Maximum height of 3.6, no average requirements and no length of wall and boundary restrictions. Now that's to sort of tie into the exceptions of the code as well. If you've got an edge lot, if you've got a lot that's not subject to the Small Lot Housing Code or it's not on the same plan of subdivision, those averages and those length of wall and boundary restrictions come into play. So that's where you've got to be careful and you've got to be certain what is what's going on next door. Are they subject to the Small Lot Housing Code? If they are, then no averages and no length of wall and boundary restrictions apply. If they're not subject to the Small Lot Housing Code, then you've essentially got to do Part 5 design on that. Only on that boundary that relates to that adjoining allotment. So let's say, for argument's sake, your adjoining neighbour on the right-hand side isn't on the same plan of subdivision or isn't subject to the Small Lot Housing Code. On that boundary, you need to apply Part 5. On the left-hand side, you're free to go Small Lot Housing Code. So, yeah, it's not a outright rule that you need to apply Part 5. It just applies to that boundary, to that adjoining neighbour that's not subject to it. Buildings and carports can exceed 3.6 in height if they abut an existing neighbour or a simultaneously approved boundary wall that exceeds the height of 3.6. So as you can see here, if you're building simultaneously approved dwellings, you can exceed the 3.6 high maximum. And you can have a height difference. So as you can see there, let's say you're building these 3 dwellings, you've got one that's, let's say, 5 metres, then you're building one to 6.9. That height difference cannot exceed 3.6 metres. And also, if you're building up against an existing or a simultaneously approved dwelling, the length of the wall as well can't exceed 2 metres, I believe it is. I'll touch on that in a moment. It is 2 metres. I seem to have left that out, but it's yeah. So if you're building up against an existing wall and boundary, so the height difference can't exceed 3.6 metres max, and the length, if you want to obviously build a non-compliant length of wall, but you're abutting an existing wall that doesn't comply initially, you can have the length exceeding a little bit, but not more than 2 metres past the existing wall. So I've got here the other 2 setback profiles for walls on boundary. On the left-hand side, we've got the setback profile for walls on boundary that are adjoining an allotment. Obviously, maximum 3.6 high, but then up to 1 metre setback, you can go to 6.9 metres. Excuse me. On the right-hand side, you can go wall and boundary up to 6.9 metres if you are abutting a laneway or street or anything that's considered a street or a walkway. So obviously on the left-hand side, if you're abutting an existing wall and boundary or you're building simultaneously approved dwellings, you can move to the one on the right-hand side because you can go up to 6.9 for simultaneously approved dwellings. That applies more to medium density and things like that. But if you do decide to, or you do come across a design that is over 3.6 on boundary, you're more than free to build and to match their height. Standards 9 and 10. In difference to Part 5, standards 9 and 10 have no requirements under the Small Lot Housing Code, so that's a bit of freedom there. It's just too hard. We've obviously had designs where, I mean, it's going to be too hard to try and make a design comply where you've got to take into account existing habitable room windows or north-facing windows. But it's also important to note, again, if the adjoining lot isn't subject to the Small Lot Housing Code, you've got to take those into account. So it does provide additional restrictions on the lot, but if let's say you've got to run a Small Lot Housing Code jobs, standards 9 and 10, no requirements, which is great. Standard 11, overshadowing. A building must not reduce the sunlight to any secluded private open space of an existing building on an adjoining allotment to less than 6 metres squared with a minimum dimension of 2. So as you can see there on the example I provided here, that's our proposed dwelling, that's the existing house. That portion there, that darker rectangle, is the additional shadow we're providing. But as you can see, they still achieve their unshaded minimum 2 metres, 6 square metres with a minimum 2 metre dimension. So you do comply. That's all you need to show on the drawings. Anything like that, as long you can further reduce, as long as they are maintaining a 6 square metre unshaded private open space with a minimum dimension of 2, we'll deem it compliant, and you guys are free. You're good. So that's really all you need to take into account. You've got to take into account existing shadows, nothing too different to what you're already providing on the drawings, existing shadows, fences, garages, pergolas, everything like that. Where you further reduce, if you're still maintaining a 6 metre square unshaded private open space dimension or area with a minimum dimension of 2, you comply. Standard 12, overlooking. This one's a bit different. It can be a bit complicated. So habitable room windows that face a side or rear boundary in rooms with levels above 2.5 metres over natural ground, they must be set back 4.5 metres from a side or rear boundary. So that's contrary to Part 5. Part 5, your step back distance is 9 metres. So I've obviously halved it for the more restrictive lots. Have a sill height in accordance with Part 5 as well, over 1.7, over finished floor level, and have a fixed obscure glass in any part of the window below 1.7. A raised open space must be set back 4.5 metres from a side or rear boundary, unless provided with a screen 1.7 in height above the finished floor level of the raised open space. So as you can see here, I've got a bit of a diagram there showing which windows, and I believe that's in the practice note as well. So as you can see, windows 1, 2 and 5 are required to be obscured up to 1.7. So as you can see, one on the left-hand side is within 3 metres. So it's obviously within that 4.5 metre dimension opposite a habitable room. So that window does need to be obscured. Window 2 is required to be obscured because it's within that distance. So bang on 4.5 metres, you still need to restrict that window. So 4.55, 4.6, you're fine. Because it's within the 4.5 metres, that does need to be obscured. And window 5, which is top right over there, because that is facing the private open space within 4.5 metres, that window does need to be obscured as well. For windows 4, 6 and 7, because window 6 facing the rear is facing a recreational reserve, a public space, doesn't need to be obscured. 6 and 7, 7 is obviously facing a vacant lot. You don't need to obscure that window as well. And window 7, window 6, that's done. Window 4. So it's obviously exceeding past the 4.5 metre dimension there. So that window doesn't need to be obscured either. Yeah, so it is a distinction, and there has been talk that because the MPA and the VBA have had quite a few complaints with smaller housing code jobs where we've got windows facing vacant lots that aren't required to be obscured. There is a bit of talk that they may bring in obscuring for vacant lots. So that's one to look out for. But as it stands at the moment, if you've got a window that faces a vacant lot, you're free, you're good. Standard 13, daylight to habitable room windows. Each required habitable room window must face an outdoor space or light court with a minimum area of 3 metres squared and a minimum dimension of 1 metre clear to the sky, not including land on the adjoining lot. Or a veranda that's open at least 1/3 of its perimeter, or a carport that has at least 2 sides and 1/3 of its perimeter open. Now, there are a few standard designs that you guys have that don't achieve this, but we've taken a stand on those designs. We've made a decision at Group 4, because the owners chosen those designs, we're going to let them through. So it's essentially, we sort of make a risk assessment on it. The owner's chosen that design, so they're not going to fight us on it. They're not going to raise it as an issue. So it's more so take this regulation with a grain of salt. If it's a required window, we might look into it. If that's the only window, then we might have a look into it. But as it stands, we haven't given you any grief with those windows in the past. We'll continue to do so. So yeah, it's just one to obviously take note of, but not one I would worry about too much in regards to standard design. And finally, standard 14, private open space. So dwellings with 3 or more bedrooms are required to have a minimum 24 square metres of private open space at the side or rear of an allotment with a minimum dimension of 3. It can be in 2 parcels, which there is an example I'll show you in a moment, which one parcel must have a minimum dimension of 3. So those 2 parcels must equal 12 metres squared each, and one of those parcels must have a minimum dimension of 3. Or a balcony rooftop. So that's one to keep in mind too. If you guys are going to have designs where you're on type B lots, where you're having 100% site coverage, things like that. Rooftop areas or balconies must have, or the balcony of a rooftop area must have 12 square metres with a minimum dimension of 3. So that's an example which is also in the practice note, I believe. It's important to note they have made a mistake on their diagrams. So they've given you 2 spaces, 12 square metres in the second example here, where they show 3 metres squared for both. Only one of those spaces needs to have a 3 metre dimension. So please disregard one of those 3 metres, as you need to have 12 square metres. You can have 12 square metres in 2 locations. Only one of those spaces needs to have a 3 metre dimension. Yeah, and I guess that's, oh, not yet, sorry. Standard 14 continued, dwellings with 2 or less bedrooms must have a minimum 12 metre squared dimension of private open space at the side or rear with a minimum dimension of 3. Again, a balcony or rooftop area must have a minimum 10% of the total floor area of the building, or 6 square metres with a minimum dimension of 2, whichever is the greater. So that only applies to dwellings with 2 or less bedrooms. If the private open space is provided at the side or rear of a dwelling, an area of at least 6 square metres with a minimum dimension of 2 must be provided as unshaded private open space, as we've covered off previously, which you guys don't really have any trouble with at the moment. Your diagrams are great, so that's just a requirement as well. And thank you. That's it, guys. It's been a pleasure. Obviously, as I said, this is going to be something that's going to be more prevalent in our lives moving forward. So it's best to get a jump on it, get a grip now. And yeah, I guess once the new code comes in, whatever substantial changes they've got, I can come back, do a refresher, things like that. But for the moment, that's everything we've got to comply with. So thank you. Any questions? Yes, Andrew.
Yep, I've got one. So for standard 2, you need a 10 metre length, 10% setback for the corner treatment.
Yep.
Can you have a 10% protrusion instead of setback? Could we do an engaged group here?
You can. So if you've got a, let's say for argument's sake, it's a minimum calculation. If you've got an engaged pier that protrudes out and everything else is set back, that achieves your minimum. So you can have everything else set back, which is obviously something you guys do. So yeah, you can have an engaged pier protrude out, and then everything else is considered an articulation the other way. So that's fine. Yep.
Got another one. So in that example of the porch, the first floor balcony, where they had one example where it was roofed and one example where it wasn't roofed. If you have an eave, is an eave roofed?
Yeah, we'll consider that a roof.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you've got an eave overhanging, let's say, for argument's sake, on the left-hand side there, like I touched on, we'll consider that a partial roof.
Yep.
So we'll consider that a roof balcony. Yeah. Yeah.
Is the rubber beam considered roof or?
Is that okay?
A beam.
Yeah.
Look, I guess I wouldn't consider that a roof. Obviously the tail of a rafter with a fascia gutter or an actual roof, you'd almost consider a beam almost like a sunroof. I wouldn't consider that a roof. Yeah.
Adding the fin to the front facade, is that fin now part of the front setback, or that's just an encroachment?
No, that's an allowable encroachment.
Okay.
So we won't take the front, the minimum setback to that fin. We'll take it to your front wall.
To the front.
If the fin's an allowable encroachment or a design feature. Yeah. But it's also, I guess, sort of touching on that, it's also important to note if you've got, let's say, a front facade articulation that's sort of falls outside a fin, or it's quite wide and it's tied into the wall, or it sort of contributes to that wall, it comes off a corner or something like that, we'll consider that part of the front wall But if it's its own independent design feature, we'll consider that a fin, but if it's sort of hard to explain without coming off or without sort of diagrams, but if it's coming off a corner and it looks like it's part of the front wall of the dwelling, we'll consider that part of the front wall. But if it's, like I said, minimum 300, maximum 1 metre, if it falls within those guidelines, we'll look at it as a fin.
I've got a question about the windows, the obscure treatment. So in the smaller housing code, it says fixed and obscured up to 1.7. In the, I think it was a practice note example, it just said obscured.
Yeah.
So does it need to be fixed and obscured or just obscured?
I think by what they mean by fixed is permanent, like a permanent solution, not like a screen over the wall, over the window or something like that. As long as it's obscured glazing or a film of obscure glazing, that they'd have to sit there and take it off. We'd consider that part of it's protected from overlooking. But the window itself doesn't need to be fixed. It can still be an awning window, openable. Obviously, I guess one sort of thing that we have seen a fair bit, not so much from you guys, but from a few of our other builders, sliding windows, no good for overlooking because you can slide it and then you've obviously got that whole portion there. So just to, I guess reiterate, sliding windows are no good. Awning is fine. Openable portion of the awning is fine. Just no sliding windows.
He's not in here, no.
He's meant to be in here.
He should be at his desk.
Well, look, I guess if you sort of go away and you've got any questions, Andrew's got my contact details. There are a few of us as well who have my contact details. Please don't be afraid to give me a buzz. Don't be afraid to shoot me an email. More than happy to put anything in writing. If you need to go to a developer or go back to the owners, anything like that. More than happy. Please shoot me an email with some documentation. I can have a look and give my 2 cents. And more than happy to, guys.
Quickly, for those who are on Teams, if you've got any questions, can you just raise your hand in the Teams chat? Just check if you've got any questions. Or if you've got any questions, just on mic and then ask a question. We'll give you like 5 seconds. No. Okay.
Right, and obviously same for you guys at home. Please don't be afraid to shoot me an email, give me a call. More than happy to help.
Cheers, thank you, John.
Thank you very much. No problem at all. Thanks, son. Thank you. Have a good day, guys. Thanks. Thank you. Have a good day.